James told me the party at Hawthorne House was for an important client. I believed him until the hostess kissed him on the cheek and said, "I'm so glad you finally brought her." Then James introduced me to the room as the woman who used to keep the house running while he built his future. The guests laughed politely. I saw photographs of James and Claire lining the walls of his late mother's home. I escaped upstairs, opened Helen's old desk, and found a sealed letter with my name on it. The first line made my hands shake. "Olivia, if James ever brings you here with another woman, do not let him know you found this. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I need to know what would you have done in my place." Before I tell you what Helen wrote in that letter, you need to understand something about James and me. People who met us in the last 10 years saw the navy suits, the black SUV, and the gold sign outside Smith Family Renovations. They never saw the garage. It was a narrow space behind our first rental house in Cedar Ridge, Ohio. Our office was a folding table beside a tool chest. James kept invoices in a shoebox. I kept the real records in a blue notebook, every dollar written in neat columns because we could not afford mistakes. Back then, James was different. He came home with paint on his shirt and cuts across his hands, but he was loud with hope. We would sit at the kitchen table after Matthew fell asleep, and he would tell me about the jobs he had finished and the clients he hoped would call again. "One day, Liv," he used to say, "holding my hand, we'll have something of our own, something nobody can take away from us." I believed him because I loved him, and because in those years he made every dream feel like it belonged to both of us. When Matthew was born, I rocked a baby with one arm while answering the phone with the other. I mailed estimates during nap time, typed invoices after midnight, and drove to the bank with a sleeping toddler because payroll could not wait. I handled permits, insurance paperwork, receipts, tax folders, and difficult clients. There were months when our checking account had less than $50. Still, James would look at me and say, "I couldn't do this without you." For a long time, I believed him. Smith Family Renovations grew one job at a time. A kitchen remodel became 3. Then came storm repairs, commercial work, and eventually entire subdivisions. When we hired our first employee, James opened cheap champagne in the garage, and 6-year-old Matthew cheered at the cork. That was our life messy modest reel. Then success arrived, and it did not knock politely. At first, the changes were easy to excuse. James stayed late for meetings that had no clear purpose. He bought expensive shirts wrapped in tissue paper. He corrected the way I spoke in front of others, saying I was too direct when I asked reasonable questions about the company. Then he stopped inviting me to networking dinners. "They're all business," he said. "You'd be bored." When I asked to go anyway, he kissed my cheek and told me not to make everything into a problem. I did not want to search for meaning in every late-night unexplained charge or quick glance at a phone screen. So I chose the easier explanation. He was tired under pressure and still remembered who I was. But little by little, James moved me away from the center of the life we had built. He hired an outside accounting firm and said the company had become too complicated for me. He changed passwords on financial software. He stopped leaving paperwork on the kitchen counter. When I asked about unfamiliar vendors or missing payments, he sighed as if I had interrupted something important. "You don't need to carry all that anymore, Olivia," he said once. "You should enjoy yourself." It sounded generous. It was not. There is a difference between being relieved of a burden and being removed from a place where your voice once mattered. I felt it when his office door stayed closed, when Matthew mentioned decisions I did not know about, and when James introduced me only as my wife Olivia, never as the woman who had built the books and stability beneath his success. I became a decorative part of his story, and the cruelest thing was that I began to accept it. Helen never did. My mother-in-law was sharp, private, and difficult to impress, but she treated me as if she saw something in me James sometimes forgot to notice. When Matthew was little, she would take him for an afternoon so I could catch up on work. She never called it helping. She simply said, "The business needs Olivia today." As the company grew, Helen asked questions no one else asked. Did I still have access to the books? Was James taking on too much debt? Why had he moved company accounts to a new bank? At the time, I thought she was simply being suspicious. Now I wonder how long she had been watching him. In the final months before she died, Helen called one afternoon and asked whether James had shown me the latest financial statements. When I said no, the silence on the line made my stomach tighten. "Keep copies of what matters," she said quietly. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means men become careless when they believe everyone around them is grateful for them." Then she changed the subject. I should have asked more questions. I should have driven to Hawthorne House and refused to leave until she told me what she knew. But warnings often disguise themselves as ordinary moments. You never recognize the door closing until you are standing on the wrong side of it. A week before the party, James came home earlier than usual. I was folding laundry when he stood in our bedroom doorway, watching me as though I were someone he barely knew. "Clear your Saturday night," he said. "Why client event?" "Which client?" He adjusted his cufflinks. "Does it matter?" "It does if you expect me to spend an evening smiling at strangers." He gave me a thin smile. "It's at Hawthorne House. Wear the blue dress. The one that makes you look appropriate." I stared at him. Hawthorne House had been Helen's pride, filled with Christmas dinners, family birthdays, and a Thanksgiving when James burned the turkey and we laughed until midnight. After she died, James became strangely possessive of it, saying legal details still needed to be settled. So why was he suddenly taking me there? "Who is hosting?" I asked. "Just be ready by 7, Olivia," he said, "and please don't embarrass me." He walked away before I could answer. I stood there holding one of his white shirts, my fingers curled around its sleeve, listening to the front door close. At the time, I thought he was taking me to a client event. I did not know he was taking me to the place where he planned to erase me. The road to Hawthorne House was only 20 minutes from our home, but that night it felt much longer. James drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting loosely near the gear shift, humming along to a song playing low through the speakers. He looked calm, polished, almost cheerful. I sat beside him in the blue dress he had told me to wear, staring out at the dark Ohio streets sliding past the window. "Who exactly is this client?" I asked again. James did not look at me. "Why do you keep asking? Because you've been vague all week." "It's an event, Olivia. That's all you need to know." His tone had that familiar warning in it, the one that said a simple question had already become an inconvenience. So I went quiet. By the time we turned through the iron gates of Hawthorne House, the place was glowing. Warm gold light spilled through the tall windows. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Valets moved briskly through the cold evening air, opening doors and calling names. For one weak, hopeful second, I thought perhaps I had misunderstood everything. Maybe this truly was a business event. Maybe James had finally decided to include me again. Then I noticed the flowers. They were white orchids and pale roses arranged in tall crystal vases along the front steps. Helen had hated orchids. She said they looked too perfect to be trusted. I remembered that because she had once pulled one from a centerpiece at a charity luncheon and whispered to me, "Beautiful things are not always kind." At the time, I laughed. That night, I did not. A young woman in a black dress greeted us at the door with a clipboard in her hand. She smiled at James like she knew him well. "Mr. Smith, we're so glad you made it." James gave her a small nod like a man entering a place where he belonged. Then she looked at me. "And you must be Olivia." The way she said my name made my chest tighten, not with warmth, with recognition. Before I could ask who she was, James placed his hand lightly against my back and guided me inside. Hawthorne House had always been elegant, but Helen's elegance had been quiet. Dark wood, framed family photographs, antique lamps, the scent of cedar and old books. That night, it had been transformed. The foyer was filled with champagne trays, soft music, and guests wearing expensive suits and glittering dresses. The walls had been draped with white fabric and gold lighting. A large sign near the staircase read, "Bennett, events a night of new beginnings." I stopped walking. Bennett. James kept moving, but I stayed still for 1 second too long. "Come on," he said under his breath. "Bennett events," I asked. He gave me a look that was half irritation, half amusement. "Don't start." My mouth went dry. Across the room, I saw her. Claire Bennett stood near the fireplace in a silver dress that caught the light every time she moved. She was beautiful in the careful, polished way that seemed effortless from a distance. Her hair fell perfectly around her shoulders. Her smile was bright, practiced, and just a little too confident. She turned toward us, and then she walked directly to James. Not to me, to him. "James," she said warmly. Before I could fully understand what I was seeing, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Not a polite greeting. Not the kind of kiss a hostess gives a guest. It was familiar, possessive, the kind of gesture that told me she had done it before. James did not pull away. He smiled at her. Then Claire finally looked at me. "Oh," she said as though she had almost forgotten I existed. "You must be Olivia." Her expression was soft, polite, and perfectly controlled. But there was something behind it, something smug. "I've heard so much about you." I looked at James. He did not meet my eyes. Instead, he reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray and handed it to Claire before taking one for himself. That was when I knew. Not because of the kiss, not even because of the way she looked at him. I knew because he had already chosen her comfort over my dignity. Claire turned towards a group of guests nearby. "Everyone, this is James's wife." The word wife hung in the air like something old and awkward. One of the men, a gray-haired developer I vaguely recognized from a company dinner years ago, smiled at me. "It's nice to meet you, Olivia. James speaks highly of the business." Before I could respond, James laughed lightly. "Oh, Olivia was there in the early days," he said, "back when everything was smaller." The man nodded politely. "Well, that still counts for something." James took a sip of champagne. "She kept the house running," he said, "while I built the real future." The people around us gave uncomfortable little laughs. It was not loud laughter. That almost would have been easier. It was the kind that comes from people who know something cruel has been said but do not want to be the first to show discomfort. I felt the heat rise in my face. For 34 years, I had told myself James could be sharp when stressed, difficult when scared, self-centered when under pressure. But this was different. This was deliberate. He had brought me here so everyone could watch him reduce me to a background figure in the life we had built together. Claire tilted her head sympathetically. "You know," she said, touching my arm lightly, "some women find it hard to move on when life changes." Her fingers were cold. "I think it's sad," she continued, "especially when they keep holding on to roles that no longer fit." I stared at her hand on my arm until she pulled it away. For a moment, I wanted to say everything. I wanted to ask her how many nights she had sat in the dark while James claimed to be working late. I wanted to ask whether she knew who had paid for the champagne in her hand, the flowers in the foyer, the designer dress clinging to her body. I wanted to ask James whether he remembered the garage, the blue notebook, the nights I stayed awake until 2 a.m. trying to keep his dream alive. But I did not say any of it. Not because I was weak, because something inside me had gone still. A strange calm settled over me, sharp and cold. I looked around the room again, at the polished guests, at the gold signs, at the flowers Helen would have hated, at the photographs displayed along a table near the dining room. And that was when I saw them. James and Claire on a beach. James and Claire at a restaurant. James and Claire standing beside a Christmas tree I did not recognize. James and Claire laughing together in front of a fireplace. Not hidden, not discreet, displayed like a story they were proud of, a story they had already decided everyone should accept. I walked away before either of them could stop me. No one called after me. That hurt more than I expected. I moved through the hallway past the old dining room where Helen used to serve Thanksgiving dinner. The same room where Matthew had once spilled cranberry sauce on the carpet and cried because he thought he had ruined Christmas. Everything looked different now. The house had not changed. I had. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand resting on the banister Helen had once polished herself. The music downstairs grew softer as I reached the second floor. At the end of the hallway was Helen's old writing room. The door was closed. For a moment I stood there with my hand on the knob. I remembered Helen sitting inside that room in the final year of her life, wrapped in a soft gray sweater, looking smaller than she ever had before. She had asked me once if I was happy. I had lied. "Yes," I told her. She had looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Don't confuse staying quiet with being safe." I opened the door. The room smelled like leather dust and old paper. The shelves were still full of Helen's books. Her desk stood near the window exactly as I remembered it, dark wood with brass handles and a small lamp beside a framed photo of James as a boy. I crossed the room and opened the top drawer. Nothing. Pens, stationery, a silver letter opener. Then I noticed the lower drawer. Locked. My breath caught. Years ago, Helen had given me a small brass key. She had said it opened something important, but she never explained what she meant. I had kept it in my jewelry box, thinking it was only a sentimental gift. That night I was wearing it on a thin chain around my neck. My hands trembled as I slipped the key into the lock. It turned easily. Inside the drawer was a single envelope. My name was written across the front in Helen's unmistakable handwriting. Olivia. I picked it up carefully. From downstairs I heard James laugh. Then Claire's voice followed, low and pleased. I broke the seal. The paper in my hands was thinner than I expected. For one strange second, I could not make myself read it. Downstairs, music drifted through the floorboards, glasses clinked, someone laughed too loudly. The sound of the party seemed to belong to another world, one where I was still standing beside James in my blue dress, smiling through humiliation, because that was what good wives were expected to do. But upstairs in Helen's writing room, there was only silence. I unfolded the letter. My dear Olivia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and James has finally shown you the part of himself he worked so hard to hide. I had to stop and press my fingers against my lips. Helen had always been direct, but even in death, her words carried the same steady force they had when she was alive. I kept reading. Please do not blame yourself for what you did not see. James learned long ago how to make people doubt their own instincts. He does it with charm when charm works and with cruelty when it does not. My eyes filled with tears. For years, I had told myself that I was imagining things, that James's distance was stress, that his sharp words came from pressure, that the lonely dinners, locked office doors, and unexplained expenses were ordinary signs of a marriage growing older. Helen had seen it. Maybe she had seen it before I was ready to. The next paragraph was written more carefully, as if every word had cost her something. Several months before my illness worsened, I discovered irregular transfers from Smith Family Renovations. At first, I believed they were mistakes, but the more I reviewed the reports, the more I understood that James was moving money through accounts without proper explanation. I felt cold. The letter trembled in my hands as I read on. Some payments were listed as consulting fees, others as marketing expenses, equipment deposits, or client development costs. But the names did not match the work. The amounts did not match the invoices. And when I asked James about them, he became angry in a way that frightened me. I looked toward the door. The hallway was empty. Still, I lowered my voice as though James might somehow hear the paper breathing in my hands. Helen wrote that she had hired Thomas Reed, the family's estate attorney, to review her personal assets and the company structure. At first, she had done it because she was worried about the future of the business. But the more she learned, the more concerned she became about James himself. She believed he had taken on debts no one else knew about. She believed he had used company funds to support a private life outside of our family. She believed he had begun treating assets that did not belong to him as if they were his personal property. My stomach tightened. Claire's flowers, Claire's party, the photographs, the expensive champagne. I suddenly saw the evening differently. James had not brought me to Hawthorne House because he wanted to humiliate me alone. He had brought me there because he wanted everyone else to believe he owned the place. He wanted clients, investors, and Claire to see him as the man with the estate, the company, the money in the future. But Helen's letter was telling me something very different. Near the bottom of the page, she wrote, "Before my death, I amended the family trust. Hawthorne House and 51% of my ownership interest in Smith Family Renovations were placed into that trust. You, Olivia, are named as successor trustee." For a moment, I did not understand what I had read. I read it again and again. Hawthorne House, 51% of the company, successor trustee. I sat slowly in Helen's desk chair because my knees no longer trusted me. James had always spoken about Hawthorne House as though it belonged to him. He made decisions about it. He kept the keys. He said he was handling the legal matters after Helen's death. And the company James had always called himself the owner, the founder, the man who built everything. But according to this letter, Helen had made sure he did not control all of it. Not anymore. There was another envelope inside the first one. My name was written on the front again, but this time in smaller letters. "For when you are ready." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a copy of a legal document with Thomas Reed's name at the bottom and a simple handwritten note from Helen. "Do not confront James yet." The words seemed to rise off the page. "Do not tell him what you know. Do not let him rush you into signing anything. Do not believe him if he says he is protecting you. He has spent too long protecting only himself." My heart was beating hard now. The letter continued. "James may try to convince you that you are confused, emotional, or ungrateful. He may use Matthew to make you feel guilty. He may speak gently, or he may become cruel. But please remember this. A man who needs you silent is afraid of what you might say when you finally understand the truth." Tears slipped down my face. Not loud tears. Not the kind that demand to be noticed. They fell quietly onto Helen's handwriting, and I wiped them away before they could blur the ink. For the first time in years, I did not feel foolish for being hurt. I felt warned. The final page gave me Thomas Reed's private number and a short instruction. "Call him from a phone James cannot access. Tell him you found this letter. He will know what to do next." Then, beneath that, Helen had written one last sentence. "Hawthorne House is not James's to sell, borrow against, or give away, and neither are you." I pressed the letter against my chest. The room around me blurred. All those years I had thought Helen loved me because I was her son's wife. I thought she saw me as part of the family only because I had stayed loyal, cooked the holiday meals, raised Matthew, and made myself useful. But she had seen more than that. She had seen the woman I used to be before James slowly taught me to shrink. Downstairs, the music stopped for a moment. I heard someone begin tapping a glass for attention. Then James's voice rose above the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said. The applause that followed made my skin crawl. He was standing downstairs in a house he did not own, celebrating a life paid for with money he may have stolen beside a woman he had probably promised the world. And he had no idea that upstairs in the one room he had forgotten to control, I was holding the truth in my hands. I folded Helen's letter carefully. Then I placed it inside my clutch. Not because I was ready to fight. Not yet. Helen had warned me not to confront him until I understood the full picture. So I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and looked at myself in the dark reflection of the window. For 34 years, I had been James Smith's wife. That night, I began to remember I was Olivia Smith. And before I walked back downstairs, I made myself one promise. James would never know what I had found, not until it was too late for him to stop me. By the time I came back downstairs, James was standing beside Claire near the fireplace, one hand resting casually at the small of her back. He saw me crossing the room and smiled as though nothing had happened. "There she is," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd gone home." Claire's eyes moved over my face, searching for tears. I gave her none. "I needed a moment," I said. James lifted his champagne glass. "We'll try not to disappear again. A few people were asking for you." The lie was so effortless that I almost admired it. No one had been asking for me. No one had even noticed when I left. But James had spent years reshaping reality until the version that benefited him sounded like the only version anyone should believe. I looked at him carefully. His hair was neat. His smile was relaxed. His expensive watch caught the soft gold light from the chandelier. He looked like a man who had everything under control. And for the first time, I knew he did not. Not completely. I stayed at the party for another 20 minutes. I spoke to no one unless I had to. I did not confront Claire. I did not ask James why he had paraded me through a house that did not belong to him. I did not tell him that Helen had left me something far more powerful than a memory. Instead, I watched. I watched the way James greeted people like a host. I watched the way he described Hawthorne House as though he had inherited every brick in it. I watched the way Claire stood beside him, glowing with the certainty of a woman who believed she had won. Then I noticed something else. Near the dining room, a man in a charcoal suit was speaking with James. He had a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. James's posture changed the moment he saw him. His shoulders tightened. His smile became too wide. The man handed James a card. James slipped it into his jacket pocket quickly. When he turned back toward the room, he found me watching him. For half a second, his face changed. Not much, just enough. Then he walked over to me and placed a firm hand around my elbow. "We're leaving," he said. His fingers pressed harder than necessary. I smiled faintly. "Of course." The ride home was silent. James drove faster than usual, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the road. I sat beside him with Helen's letter hidden safely in my clutch, every sentence burning in my mind. "Do not confront James yet. Do not let him rush you into signing anything. He will use Matthew to make you feel guilty." I could hear Helen's voice in every word. When we pulled into the driveway, James cut the engine but did not move. For several seconds, he stared through the windshield at our dark house. Then he said, "You embarrassed me tonight." I turned toward him slowly. "I embarrassed you." "You disappeared in the middle of an important event. People noticed. James, you introduced me as someone who used to keep the house running while you built your future." He shrugged as if I had repeated something trivial. "It was a joke." "No, it wasn't." His face hardened. "This is exactly what I mean, Olivia. You take everything personally. You make every room feel heavy." I looked at him. 34 years of marriage sat between us in that car. 34 years of birthdays, bills, arguments, holidays, hospital visits, and whispered promises. And he spoke to me as if I were an inconvenience he had outgrown. "I saw the pictures," I said quietly. James went still. "What pictures of you and Claire?" He let out a long breath, not like a man caught in a lie, but like a man annoyed that someone had noticed the obvious. "Olivia, he said you don't understand the situation." "Then explain it." He turned toward me with a tired expression I had seen before. It was the face he wore when he wanted to make me feel unreasonable. "Claire is part of the business world I'm in now. She understands how things work. She understands what I need." The words entered my chest like cold water. "And what do I understand?" I asked. He looked away. "You understand the past." For a moment I could not breathe. Then he opened the car door and stepped outside. I followed him into the house. Inside, he went straight to his office. I stood in the hallway, still wearing the blue dress he had chosen for me, still holding the clutch that contained the letter he never knew existed. A minute later, he returned carrying a thick envelope. "There's something we need to discuss," he said. He placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. The white paper looked innocent, clean, ordinary. I already knew it was not. "What is it?" I asked. "A temporary separation agreement." I kept my face calm. "Temporary?" "Yes." He loosened his tie. "Things are complicated right now. The company is under pressure. The market is changing. There are financial concerns." "You mean the company is under pressure?" "I mean we need to protect what we have." He pushed the envelope toward me. "Sign it, Olivia. This keeps things simple." I did not touch it. What exactly am I signing? His patience vanished so quickly that I almost smiled. You always make this harder than it needs to be. I'm asking a question. It's a standard agreement, he snapped. You stay in the house for now. I keep the business stable. We avoid a messy fight. I looked down at the envelope again. Then I remembered Helen's warning. Do not let him rush you into signing anything. I'll read it, I said. James crossed his arms. There's nothing to read, it's just paperwork. Then you won't mind if I take my time? His eyes narrowed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he picked up the envelope and tapped it once against the counter. You know, Matthew is already stressed, he said. He doesn't need his mother creating drama. There it was, exactly as Helen had predicted. I felt something inside me settle. James did not know it, but every word he said was no longer hurting me the way it once had. It was confirming what I needed to know. You're right, I said softly. Matthew doesn't need more stress. The tension left his shoulders. He thought I was agreeing. I'll look at it tomorrow, I added. His expression sharpened again. Tonight would be better. I'm tired, James. I walked past him before he could answer. In our bedroom, I locked the door and placed the envelope on the bed. Then I opened it. The agreement was 12 pages long. At first glance, it looked exactly like James had said, a temporary separation arrangement supposedly designed to protect the company. But I had spent too many years reading contracts, invoices, payroll forms, and financial statements to be fooled by polite language. Buried beneath the legal phrases were clauses that made my hands shake. If I signed, I would waive any immediate claim to the marital home. I would give up access to several joint bank accounts. I would agree that James had sole authority over Smith family renovations during the separation. And worst of all, I would acknowledge that certain business debts were shared household obligations. He wanted me to sign away the house. He wanted me to accept debts I had never agreed to. He wanted legal control before I understood what he had done. I folded the agreement carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I went to my jewelry box. Beneath an old pair of pearl earrings was a prepaid phone I had bought months earlier for an emergency after James had once accused me of checking up on him when I used our shared phone plan to question a suspicious charge. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number Helen had written in her letter. It rang twice. Thomas Reed speaking. I swallowed. My name is Olivia Smith, I said. Helen left me a letter. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Are you somewhere safe? I'm at home. Is James there? Yes. Can he hear you? No. Thomas took a slow breath. Then listen carefully, Olivia. Do not sign anything. Do not tell him you found the letter. And tomorrow morning you need to come see me. My heart pounded. Is the trust real? I whispered. Yes, he said. It is very real. I closed my eyes. What else did Helen know? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Enough to be afraid for you, but not enough to prove everything. We will need records, Olivia. Financial statements, account details, company documents. Anything James tried to keep from you. I looked toward the bedroom door. On the other side of it was the man I had trusted for most of my life. The man who had brought me to his mistress's party. The man who wanted me to sign away my home, my security, and maybe even my future. I understand, I said. No, Thomas replied gently. Not yet. But you will. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed with Helen's letter in my lap. For years, James had convinced me that I was too emotional, too dependent, too old to understand the world he had built around himself. But that night, I finally understood one thing. He was not trying to leave me. He was trying to erase me before I discovered how much of our life he had already stolen. The next morning, I left the house before James woke up. I told him I was meeting Rachel for coffee. It was the first lie I had told my husband in 34 years that did not make me feel guilty. Maybe that is what happens when a marriage has already been filled with lies for too long. Eventually, protecting yourself stops feeling like betrayal. It starts feeling like survival. Thomas Reed's office was in an old brick building downtown above a bookstore that had been there since Matthew was a boy. I remembered bringing him there on rainy Saturdays, letting him choose one book while I looked for cookbooks or accounting guides. That morning, I sat in Thomas's waiting room with my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at a framed photograph of Helen on the wall. She looked exactly as I remembered her upright posture, silver hair eyes that seemed to know more than she ever said. A woman opened the office door. Mrs. Smith, I stood. She was in her early 50s with dark blonde hair pulled into a low bun and a black leather folder tucked under one arm. Her suit was simple, but the way she carried herself made the room feel more organized. I'm Karen Mitchell, she said. Thomas asked me to join you. Are you an attorney? I handle divorce and business disputes. She offered her hand. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I shook her hand. So am I said. Thomas led us into a conference room where several files had been spread across the long oak table. There was coffee-bottled water and a yellow legal pad with my name written across the top. For a moment, I felt foolish sitting there. I had spent most of my life handling everyone else's crisis. I had helped James recover from bad contracts, late payrolls, insurance claims, and the occasional client who refused to pay. I had kept the company steady when things were uncertain, but I had never been the woman in the conference room asking how much of her own life had been taken from her. Thomas placed Helen's trust documents in front of me. First, he said, "I want you to understand the basics. Helen's amendment is valid. Hawthorne House is protected by the family trust. James cannot sell it without the trustee's authorization, and I'm the trustee now." Yes. The words still felt unreal. And the company, Thomas opened another folder. Helen's trust holds 51% of the voting shares. That gives the trust controlling interest. Karen leaned forward. Which means James cannot make certain major decisions alone, she said. Not legally. Not if the documents are enforced. I looked down at the paperwork. For years, James had told me he was the company. He had said it so often that even I began to believe it. But the truth was sitting on the table in black ink. He was not the company. He was only the man who had learned how to speak the loudest in it. Karen slid a blank notepad toward me. "I need you to tell us everything you remember," she said. "Not just what feels important. Every account change, every unexplained payment, every vendor name that seemed unfamiliar, every time James asked you not to look at something." I let out a breath. That could take all day. "Then we'll take all day?" So I began. I told them about the outside accounting firm James hired 2 years earlier. I told them about the passwords he changed, the paper statements that stopped arriving at the house, and the meetings he held after work with people whose names he never shared. I told them about the new vehicles purchased through the company, the unusual marketing expenses, and the way James became angry whenever I asked why a renovation business suddenly needed luxury event consultants. Karen wrote quickly. Thomas listened without interrupting. Then I remembered something. "A vendor called Bennett Events," I said. Karen stopped writing. "Claire Bennett's company." Thomas looked at me carefully. "How long have you seen that name? I don't know. Maybe a year. Maybe longer." I closed my eyes, searching through memories. At first, I thought it was legitimate. James said they were helping with client relations branding company events, but the payments were large. "How large?" Karen asked. "Sometimes 10,000, sometimes 15. I remember one invoice for $28,000. For one event, I never saw an event." The room went quiet. Karen opened her laptop and turned it toward me. "We requested preliminary corporate records this morning through the Trust's authority," she said. "Not everything is available yet, but we have enough to begin." Rows of payments filled the screen. Some were listed as consulting fees, some as marketing development, some as executive hospitality expenses, but each one ended with the same vendor name, Bennett Events, LLC. My throat tightened. Karen clicked through the records. Over the last 18 months, she said Smith Family Renovations has transferred just over $470,000 to Bennett Events. I stared at the number. It did not look real. $470,000. I thought about the flowers at Hawthorne House, the champagne, Claire's silver dress, the photographs from beach vacations and expensive restaurants. All at once, the party no longer felt like one humiliating night. It felt like a bill I had been forced to pay without knowing it. "There's more," Karen said gently. She pulled up another report. "James has several personal debts that do not appear on the company's regular financial reports." "What kind of debts?" "A private line of credit, luxury vehicle financing, a personal loan that was renewed twice, credit cards with large balances." I felt sick. "Can he do that?" "He can take personal debt," Karen said, "but he cannot use company funds to cover it, conceal it, or place the company's assets at risk without proper approval." Thomas added, "And if he has used the family home or Hawthorne House as collateral, we need to know immediately." The phrase family home made my chest tighten. I pictured the kitchen where Matthew did homework, the bedroom where I had slept beside James for decades, the small rose bushes I planted after my father died because he loved roses. Could James really have put all of that in danger? Karen closed one file and opened another. "This is where we need your experience," she said. "You know the company's habits. You know which expenses make sense and which ones don't." For the next several hours, I did what I had always done. I looked at numbers, and the numbers began to tell a story. There were payments to Bennett Events that did not match any listed company event. There were deposits made a day before expensive charges appeared on James's corporate card. There were hotel bills in cities where Smith Family Renovations had no projects: Miami, Napa Valley, Charleston. places James had told me he was visiting for work. There were restaurant charges, jewelry stores, spa resorts, and a car service company used repeatedly on weekends. Each record felt like another door opening into a part of my marriage I had never been allowed to see. But then Karen found something that made the room go still again. Olivia, she said, "Do you recognize this authorization code?" She turned the screen toward me. It was connected to several large transfers payments that had moved money through internal company accounts before ending up with Claire's business. Beside each transfer was a digital approval. Matthew Smith, my son's name. I stared at it until the letters blurred. "No," I whispered. Karen's voice softened. "We don't know what this means yet. He wouldn't do this. I'm not saying he did. But his name is there." "Yes," she said. "His electronic authorization is there." I pressed my palms against the table. Matthew had been working at the company for nearly 10 years. James had brought him in after college, telling everyone he was proud to have his son learn the business. But now I remembered things I had ignored. Matthew complaining that his father rushed him through documents. Matthew saying he was too busy to read every report because James had already reviewed it. Matthew joking once that his father treated him like the signature guy. At the time, I thought it was harmless. Now I felt fear rise in my throat. "What if James used him?" I asked. Karen did not answer immediately. "That is possible," she said carefully. Sometimes people with authority ask family members to approve documents without giving them the full picture. Sometimes they use shared access saved passwords or pressure. Thomas leaned forward. "The important thing is not to accuse Matthew before we know the facts, but if he signed something, then we find out what he knew," Thomas said, "and what James told him." I looked down at my son's name on the screen. The betrayal had already taken my husband. I could survive that. But the thought that James might have pulled Matthew into his deception, might have used our son as a shield for his own greed, hurt in a different way. It was not only about money anymore, it was about what kind of father he had become. Karen closed the laptop. "From this point forward," she said, "you need to document everything. Every conversation. Every document James gives you. Every threat, every change in his behavior." Thomas nodded. "And do not confront him about the financial records." "Not yet." I thought of James standing in our kitchen pushing the separation agreement toward me. "Sign it, Olivia. This keeps things simple." He had believed I was too frightened to ask questions. He had believed I would stay quiet because I always had. But as I left Thomas's office that afternoon, I understood something I had not understood before. James was not afraid of losing me. He was afraid of what I might discover once I stopped trusting him. And now, for the first time, I was ready to discover all of it. When I got home from Thomas Reed's office, James was waiting for me in the kitchen. He was seated at the table with his laptop open and a cup of coffee in front of him. For a moment, he looked almost normal, like the man who used to wait up for me after long days when Matthew was little, like the man who would ask if I had eaten, then warm a plate of dinner without being asked. But that man had been gone for a long time. "Where were you?" he asked. I set my purse on the counter. "Out." His eyes lifted slowly. "Out where?" "With Rachel." The lie came more easily this time, but I hated that it had to. James studied my face for a few seconds. He had always been good at watching people, not listening to them, watching them, looking for hesitation, guilt, weakness. Then he nodded once. Matthew called. My heart tightened. What did he want? "He's worried about you." There was something almost gentle in the way he said it, which made it worse. Why would Matthew be worried about me? James leaned back in his chair. "Because he heard you hired a lawyer." I kept my expression still. Of course he knew. The business had always been full of people loyal to James, employees who had worked with him for years, accountants who depended on his approval, contractors who saw him as the man who signed checks. It had been naive to think a meeting with Thomas and Karen would remain private for long. "I spoke with an attorney," I said. "That is not the same thing as hiring one." "You see," James said quietly, "this is exactly what I mean. You're already turning everything into a legal battle." I asked for advice. You went behind my back. I almost laughed. Behind his back. After he had brought me to a party hosted by his mistress. After he had introduced me like a faded piece of furniture. After he had handed me an agreement designed to take my home, my money, and my rights. But I did not laugh. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "You gave me legal paperwork without explaining it," I said. "I had questions. You could have asked me." "I did ask you." His mouth tightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and turned it face down so quickly that I knew it was not a message he wanted me to see. He stood. "Matthew is coming over," he said. "Try not to make this harder than it already is." Before I could answer, he left the kitchen. I sat alone at the table, staring at the coffee ring he had left beside his mug. Try not to make this harder. That was James's talent. He could create chaos, then blame the person who reacted to it. He could betray you, humiliate you, hide money from you, and still make you feel guilty for asking why. 20 minutes later, I heard Matthew's truck pull into the driveway. My son came through the front door without knocking. He was 36 years old, tall like James with the same dark hair starting to gray at the temples. But when he was upset, he looked like the little boy who used to stand in the hallway after a bad dream trying not to cry because he wanted to be brave. That afternoon, he looked exhausted. "Mom," he said. "Hi, sweetheart." He did not smile. James stood behind him, one hand resting lightly on Matthew's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it told me everything. James had already prepared him. "Can we talk?" Matthew asked. "Of course." We sat in the living room. James remained standing near the fireplace like he was there only to support his son, like he was not the reason my son had come to question me. Matthew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Dad says you hired a divorce lawyer." I looked at James. He gave me a calm, patient expression, the kind a man gives a child who has misunderstood something simple. "I spoke with an attorney," I said. "Why?" "Because your father gave me a separation agreement and asked me to sign it without reading it." Matthew looked at James. "Is that true?" James sighed. "It was a temporary arrangement," he said. "The company is under a lot of pressure right now. I was trying to protect everyone. Protect us from what Matthew asked. From unnecessary conflict," James replied. I watched my son's face as he tried to process the words. "Mom," he said carefully, "Dad says you've been acting different lately." The sentence hurt more than I expected. "Different how?" "He says you're suspicious of everything, that you think he's trying to ruin you, that you don't understand what's happening with the business." There it was. Not angry, not cruel. Worse. Concern. James had not told Matthew I was wrong. He had told him I was unstable. I folded my hands in my lap. "Did your father tell you he took me to a party at Hawthorne House?" Matthew nodded slowly. "He said it was a client event. Did he tell you Claire Bennett was hosting it?" His eyes moved toward James again. James stepped in before Matthew could answer. "Claire is an event planner," he said. "She works with the company." "That isn't what I asked," I said. His face changed. Matthew looked uncomfortable. "Mom, your father brought me into that house, introduced me to people, and told them I used to keep the house running while he built the real future?" Matthew's jaw tightened. James let out a tired breath. "It was a joke that came out wrong." "No," I said. "It was not." Silence filled the room. I wanted to tell Matthew everything. I wanted to show him Helen's letter. I wanted to show him the records Karen had uncovered. I wanted to point to his name on those digital authorizations and ask whether he remembered signing them. But I stopped myself. Thomas had warned me not to accuse anyone before we knew the full truth. And Matthew was already caught in the middle. I could see it in his eyes. He loved his father. He wanted to believe the man who had taught him how to drive, how to swing a hammer, how to shake hands with clients and look them in the eye. If I gave him half the truth without proof, James would use it to turn him against me completely. So I swallowed the words. "I am not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I am asking you to understand that I have a right to protect myself." Matthew looked down at his hands. "I just don't want this family to fall apart." Neither did I. But families do not fall apart because one person starts asking questions. They fall apart because someone spends years building a lie inside them. After Matthew left, James did not speak to me for the rest of the evening. He worked in his office with the door closed. I heard him on the phone twice speaking in a low voice. Once I heard Claire's name. The next day, Rachel called. "Can we meet?" she asked. "Somewhere private." We met at a small cafe near her apartment. She looked nervous when she arrived, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "I don't know how to say this," she began. "Say it however you need to." She took a breath. "James has been acting strange around Matthew for months." My heart sank. In what way? He keeps giving Matthew documents to sign, not contracts he normally handles, financial forms, loan paperwork. He tells him it's routine. He says the company is growing too fast for Matthew to waste time reading every page. I felt cold. "Has Matthew signed them?" "I think so," Rachel said softly. "He trusts his father. Have you seen the documents?" "Not all of them. But I saw one on the dining room table last month. It had the word collateral on it." The coffee in my stomach turned heavy. Rachel looked at me with frightened eyes. "Olivia, I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe it was normal business stuff. But now you're worried." She nodded. "I'm scared James is using Matthew for something he doesn't understand." I reached across the table and covered her hand. "You did the right thing by telling me." That evening, James finally came out of his office. He stood in the doorway of the living room while I folded clean towels. "We may need to sell the house," he said. I looked up. "Our house." "It could solve some of the pressure." "What pressure, James?" "The company's financial pressure." "You told me everything was fine." "Things change." He said it as though that explained anything. "You want to sell the home we raised Matthew in? I want to protect the business." I stared at him. "No," I said quietly. "You want to protect yourself." His eyes sharpened. "Be careful, Olivia." I met his gaze. For the first time, I was not afraid of the warning in his voice. After he went back to his office, I opened the prepaid phone and searched the county property records. It took less than 10 minutes to find the first sign. Our home had been listed as collateral months earlier. There was a lien attached to it. And the name connected to the loan was not only James Smith. It was Smith Family Renovations. My husband had put our home at risk without telling me. And suddenly I understood why he was so desperate for my signature. I did not sleep much after finding the lien on our home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the county record on my phone screen, the loan amount, the date, the name of Smith Family Renovations beside the address where I had raised my son, planted roses, buried 2 dogs, and believed I was safe. James had used our home as collateral months earlier, and he had done it without telling me. By morning, I had stopped crying. I was past tears. I sat at the kitchen table while James rushed through coffee and emails dressed in one of his tailored gray suits. He did not ask why I looked tired. He did not ask whether I had slept. He barely looked at me at all. "Are you going somewhere today?" he asked, checking his watch. "Yes," I said, where I took a sip of coffee. "Out." His eyes lifted toward mine. For a moment, I thought he might press me. But his phone buzzed and whatever message appeared seemed more important than questioning me. He grabbed his keys. "Don't do anything foolish, Olivia." The words landed between us. I looked at him calmly. "You should probably take your own advice." His expression hardened, but he left without another word. The second his car disappeared down the street, I called Claire Bennett. I had found her business number online the night before. It was listed beneath glossy photographs of weddings, corporate fundraisers, and luxury events. Her website described her as a visionary creator of unforgettable experiences. I almost laughed at that. She answered on the third ring. "Bennett Events. This is Claire. It's Olivia Smith." There was silence. I could hear something moving in the background, the faint sound of voices and music. Maybe she was at her office. Maybe she was planning another event with money James did not have the right to spend. "What do you want?" she asked. Her tone was guarded, but I heard fear underneath it. "I'd like to meet." "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not calling to yell at you." "That's hard to believe. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to listen for 15 minutes. She did not answer. Then she said, "There's a cafe on Maple Street. 1 o'clock. I'll be there." The cafe was quiet when I arrived. It sat between a dry cleaner and a small flower shop, the kind of place with mismatched wooden tables and handwritten chalk signs. I chose a table near the window where people could see us if they looked inside. I did not know whether Claire would come. Part of me hoped she would not. It would have been easier to remain angry with a woman who was only a distant shadow in my marriage. But at exactly 1 o'clock, she walked through the door. She wore a cream-colored coat, dark jeans, and sunglasses, even though the day was cloudy. Her hair was pulled back, and without the silver dress, perfect makeup, and crowd of wealthy strangers, she looked younger than I remembered. Not softer, just less certain. She saw me, hesitated, then walked over. "I only have 20 minutes, she said. "That's enough." She sat across from me but did not remove her coat. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I studied her face and wondered how many nights James had made her feel chosen. How often he had told her he was trapped in a loveless marriage. How many promises he had made about a future that never belonged to him. Then I remembered the photographs at Hawthorne House. I remembered her hand resting on his arm. And I reminded myself that understanding her did not mean excusing her. "You knew he was married?" I said. Claire's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And you knew he was still living with me?" "Yes." She looked down at the table. "He told me the marriage was over," she said quietly. "He said you and he were only together because of Matthew and the business." I said nothing. "He said you knew," she continued. "He said you stopped caring about him years ago, that you stayed because you liked the house, the company, the security." Her eyes lifted toward mine. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds convenient," I said. Claire swallowed. "He said he was trying to do the decent thing." The words were so familiar that they almost hurt. James had always made his selfishness sound like responsibility. He had a gift for turning cruelty into a burden he claimed he carried for everyone else. "Did he tell you about the party?" I asked. Claire frowned. "What about it? That he brought his wife there without telling her the woman hosting it was his mistress?" Her expression shifted. "I thought he told you." No. He said, she stopped. What did he say? He said you knew about me. I let the silence sit between us. Claire looked away first. For the first time since I had met her, I saw something crack in her confidence. I didn't know he was going to introduce you like that, she said. I didn't know he was going to say those things. But you stood there. Her face flushed. Yes, she whispered. I nodded once. Then I opened my purse and placed a photocopy of the trust summary on the table. Claire looked down at it. What is this Hawthorne house does not belong to James? She did not move. What it is, held by a family trust. James has no legal right to use it as his own, sell it, borrow against it, or offer it to anyone. Claire's eyes moved quickly over the page, then back to me. He told me his mother left it to him. He lied. He wouldn't lie about something like that. I almost felt sorry for her. He lied to me for years. Why would he stop with you? Claire picked up the paper, scanning the lines again. You're trying to scare me. No, I said. I'm trying to warn you. She put the document down. Warn me about what? I leaned forward slightly. Your company has received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Smith Family Renovations. Her expression went blank. That's not your business. It became my business when my husband used company money to pay you. Those were legitimate event expenses. Were they? She stared at me. Because there are invoices for consulting, branding, executive hospitality, and client development, I said. But there are no matching events, no clients, no reports, no explanations. Claire's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. You don't know how the business works. I used to do the books, I said. I know exactly how it works. She looked down. For a moment, her mask slipped completely. James said the payments were fine, she murmured. He said the company needed my services. He said he wanted to expand the brand. And did you provide $400,000 worth of services? Her face turned pale. I did not need her to answer. She took a slow breath. Some of it was for events, she said. Some of it was for travel. For client dinners. For planning. Travel for whom? She looked at me. I knew the answer. Miami. Napa Valley. Charleston. The places where James had supposedly been working. Claire leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms as if she were suddenly cold. He said he was going to leave you, she said. He said he was making arrangements. He gave me separation papers. She looked startled. When? 2 nights ago? And I did not sign them. Something flashed across her face. Relief, fear, I could not tell. Then I asked the question that had brought me there. Has James asked you to sign anything recently? Claire's eyes narrowed. Why? Because he is moving money. He has put our family home at risk. And I believe he is using people around him to cover what he is doing. For the first time, Claire looked truly frightened. He asked me to sign some forms, she admitted. What kind of forms? I don't know. Loan documents? Business documents. She shook her head quickly. He said Bennett Events was going to be part of a bigger project. He said he needed my company name because clients trusted my work. Did you sign them? I signed one. My stomach dropped. Did you read it? He said it was routine. Of course he did. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them, Claire was watching me with a look I had not seen before. Not arrogance, not triumph, panic. You think he's using me? She whispered. I think he uses everyone I said. The words were not meant to be cruel. They were simply true. Claire looked out the window. A woman walked by carrying flowers in a paper sleeve. A little boy held her hand, dragging his backpack behind him. For a moment, the world outside the cafe looked painfully ordinary. Then Claire spoke again. What do you want from me? I want you to protect yourself, I said. Get copies of every document he gave you. Every invoice, every email, every text. Do not sign anything else. She stared at me. And if I don't? Then you may find out too late that he planned to leave you holding the blame. Claire's face tightened. You don't know that. No, I said. But I know him. She stood abruptly, pulling her coat closer around her. I need to go. Claire. She stopped but did not turn around. Hawthorne House is not yours, I said. It is not his. And whatever future he promised you may be built on money he never had the right to spend. Her shoulders stiffened. Then she walked away without looking back. I watched her leave the cafe, step onto the sidewalk, and disappear into the gray afternoon. She had not agreed to help me. She had not apologized. She had not handed me any evidence. But I had seen the fear in her eyes, and I knew James had made one mistake he never expected. He had lied to the wrong woman for too long. Now, there were 2 of us beginning to see through him. 3 days after I met Claire, Thomas called me before breakfast. His voice was calm, but I had learned that calm did not always mean good news. Olivia, he said, we need to move faster. I stood in the kitchen staring at the sunrise through the window above the sink. James was still upstairs getting ready for work. I could hear drawers opening and closing, the soft rhythm of a life he still believed he controlled. "What happened?" I asked. "An agent contacted Hawthorne House yesterday afternoon." My fingers tightened around the phone. "An agent?" "Yes." "Someone requested access for a private showing." For a second, I could not speak. Thomas continued carefully. "We confirmed that James has been speaking with a real estate broker. He appears to be presenting Hawthorne House as if he has the authority to sell it." The room tilted. "He's trying to sell it." "It looks that way. But he can't." "No," Thomas said. "Not legally, but that does not mean he cannot create a mess that takes time and money to undo. If he finds an uninformed buyer signs false documents or uses the property to secure another loan, the damage could be serious." I looked toward the staircase. James had slept under the same roof as me for 34 years. He had eaten breakfast at the table beside me. He had watched me grieve my parents, celebrate Matthew's milestones, and care for Helen during her final months. And every morning, he had looked me in the eye while planning to sell a house that did not belong to him. "What do we do?" I asked. "Karen is preparing a formal notice for the broker and a protective filing related to the trust assets," Thomas said. "But I need you to come to the office today. There is more." I ended the call and stood still for a moment. Then I heard James coming downstairs. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned toward the coffee maker. He entered the kitchen wearing a dark blue suit, his hair combed neatly, his expression unreadable. He looked at me, then at the coffee cup in my hand. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." "I have a lot going on." I almost asked him whether selling his mother's home was part of it. Instead, I smiled faintly. "I'm sure you do." He poured himself coffee and scrolled through his phone. A message appeared on the screen, and for a moment I saw the name Claire before he angled the phone away. His face tightened. "Are you going somewhere today?" he asked. "Yes." His eyes rose to mine. "Where out?" The silence between us lasted only a few seconds, but it carried everything we were no longer saying. Then he set his coffee cup down. "Olivia, I don't know what game you think you're playing." I looked at him calmly. "I'm not playing a game. You've been secretive. You've been talking to people. You've been acting like I'm your enemy. The words might have hurt me once. Now they only made something inside me stronger. You brought me to your mistress's party," I said. "You handed me legal papers without telling me what was in them. You put our home up as collateral. So forgive me if I'm no longer comfortable sharing every detail of my day." For the first time, I saw a flicker of alarm in his eyes. It disappeared quickly. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I know enough." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be very careful, Olivia. You have no idea how complicated the company's situation is." I held his gaze. "No," I said quietly. "But I'm learning." He left 10 minutes later without saying goodbye. The second the front door closed, I let out the breath I had been holding. At Thomas's office, Karen was waiting with several folders spread across the conference table. Her expression was focused, but when she saw me, she softened. "We've taken steps to protect Hawthorne House," she said. "The broker has been notified that James does not have authority to list or sell the property. We are also documenting every representation he has made about ownership." "Will that stop him?" "It should stop an honest broker," Karen said. "But James may try to go around normal channels. We need to assume he is desperate." Thomas placed a document in front of me. "It gets worse," he said. I looked down. It was a proposed financial plan connected to James's personal accounts. I recognized the name of a luxury condominium development in Columbus, Ohio. The brochure showed glass balconies, a rooftop pool, and sleek apartments overlooking the river. "James is buying this?" I asked. "He appears to be trying to," Thomas said. "The initial deposit was scheduled through an account connected to Bennett Events." My stomach tightened. For Claire, Karen nodded. "It looks like he plans to sell Hawthorne House, settle several personal debts, and use the remaining funds to secure a condo." I looked at the bright photographs in the brochure. A new home for James and Claire, paid for by Helen's house, by company money, by years of work I had given without asking for anything in return. Then, Karen slid another document toward me. "This is the part that concerns us most," she said. "It was connected to our home. The loan James had taken against it was not small. There were interest penalties, renewal terms, and a clause that could put the property at immediate risk if the company failed to meet certain financial conditions. He told you the company was under pressure," Karen said. "But he did not tell you that he may be planning to leave you carrying the consequences." My chest tightened. "If the company collapses," I asked slowly, "what happens?" Karen's expression was careful. "Depending on how the debt was structured, he may try to argue that you are jointly responsible for a significant portion of it, especially if he gets you to sign the separation agreement." The paper in front of me blurred. That agreement had not been a request for space. It had been a trap. James wanted Hawthorne House the company and a new life with Claire. He wanted to escape his debts, and he wanted me to sign away my rights while accepting the burden he had created. He did not just want to leave me, he wanted me to clean up the wreckage after he was gone. Karen watched me carefully. Olivia, we need documentation. We need proof of how these debts were created, where the money went, and what James told other people. I can help with that, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. For the next several hours, I went through old files I had kept in a storage cabinet at home. I brought tax folders, handwritten notes, copies of invoices, and backup records from my years handling the books. At first, it felt like sorting through a graveyard of my own life. There were payroll ledgers from the early days, notes from Matthew's school taped to company folders, a receipt from the first office printer we bought after saving for 6 months. Then the numbers began to speak again. I found old emails from James asking me to let a few things slide because a client payment was coming soon. I found messages where he told me not to worry about a vendor because he was handling it personally. I found one chain from nearly a year earlier in which I had asked why an expense category had doubled without explanation. James had replied with only one sentence, "Stop digging for problems where there aren't any." I had apologized afterward. Reading it now made my stomach turn. I had spent years treating his anger as evidence that I had done something wrong, but anger had always been his shield. Late that afternoon, Rachel called. Her voice was shaking. "Olivia, are you somewhere private?" "Yes." "What is it? I saw Matthew last night," she said. "He was upset. James asked him to go into the old storage room at the company, the archive room." "Yes." "He told him to clear out old boxes. He said the office needed space." A cold feeling moved through me. "What boxes?" "Financial records, old vendor files, bank documents." Rachel paused. "Matthew said James told him to shred anything older than 5 years." My heart began to pound. "Did Matthew do it?" "I don't know," Rachel whispered. "He said he was too busy, but he promised his dad he would handle it this weekend." I looked at Karen across the table. She had heard every word. "Rachel," I said gently, "listen to me. Tell Matthew not to touch anything. Don't accuse James. Don't say you spoke to me. Just tell Matthew you are worried about destroying business records without checking first." "Okay," she said. "But Olivia, I think James knows something is wrong." I looked through the window at the gray afternoon sky. I thought of his warning in the kitchen. "Be very careful." He had felt the shift. Maybe he did not know about Helen's letter yet. Maybe he did not know I had met Thomas and Karen. But he knew I was no longer afraid in the same way. And that was enough to make him dangerous. When I got home that evening, James's car was already in the driveway. The house was dark except for the light from his office. I stood in the entryway listening. He was on the phone. "No," he said sharply. "I told you it needs to be done before she gets involved." My breath caught. There was a pause. Then he lowered his voice. "She doesn't know anything. She's just emotional. I'll handle Olivia." I stood there frozen. For years, James had thought my silence meant I was powerless. But now I understood the truth. He was rushing because he was afraid, and I had to find the evidence before he erased it forever. James invited us to dinner at Hawthorne House on Friday evening. The message came in a family group text as if nothing about our lives had been torn apart. "James dinner at Hawthorne House, 7 o'clock. We need to clear the air as a family." Matthew replied first. "Matthew, I'll be there." Rachel wrote a few minutes later. "Rachel, we'll come." Then, after a long silence, Claire's name appeared. "Claire, I'll be there too." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. A family dinner. At the house James had no right to use, with his mistress seated at the table. The old Olivia would have refused immediately. I would have said the situation was humiliating, cruel, and inappropriate. I would have cried in the kitchen and waited for James to tell me I was overreacting. But the old Olivia had believed that avoiding conflict could save a family. Now I knew better. Some silence protects peace. Other silence protects the person doing the damage. So I wrote one word. Olivia, fine. James came home early that afternoon. For the first time in days, he appeared almost relaxed. He had shaved carefully, chosen a dark suit, and even brought home flowers. White lilies. He set them on the kitchen counter as if he had forgotten that flowers could not fix betrayal. "I'm glad you decided to come tonight," he said. "I thought you wanted everyone there." "I do," he smiled. "I think this is an opportunity for us to move forward like adults." I looked at the lilies. Is Claire part of moving forward? His smile tightened. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything, James. You invited her. She is part of my life." The words landed with a dull ache, not because I had not known, because hearing him say them out loud made the end of something feel undeniable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't want a scene tonight." "You won't get one." He studied my face. "You seem different." "I am different." For a moment, something uneasy flashed in his eyes. Then he looked away. At 6:30, I went upstairs and put on a simple black dress. Not because I wanted to impress James, not because I wanted Claire to see what she had taken. I wore black because I was mourning something. Not my marriage. That had been dying for years. I was mourning the woman I had been when I still believed love alone could make someone honest. Before leaving, I checked my purse 3 times. My phone, the prepaid phone, a small notebook, and the unsigned separation agreement James had given me. Karen had told me to bring it. Do not sign anything she said during our call that morning, but watch what he places in front of you. Read every page. If he pressures you, let him talk. People who are desperate often reveal more than they intend. So I planned to listen. When we arrived at Hawthorne House, the lights were lower than they had been during Claire's party. There were no champagne trays, no music, no wealthy strangers laughing beneath gold decorations. But the house still felt wrong. Helen's home had always carried warmth, the smell of cinnamon during Christmas, the sound of Matthew running through the hall as a little boy, the quiet comfort of family meals where no one had to prove anything. Now the dining room had been arranged like a negotiation table. 5 place settings, 5 wine glasses, a stack of documents beside James's chair. I noticed them before he could hide them. Claire was already there, seated near the window. She wore a dark green blouse and looked nothing like the confident woman from the party. Her face was pale, her posture stiff. She met my eyes for only a moment, then she looked down. Good, I thought. Let her understand at least a little of what it felt like to sit in a room where the truth was being hidden from you. Matthew and Rachel arrived a few minutes later. Matthew looked tired. Rachel looked alert, like she knew this dinner had nothing to do with reconciliation. James poured wine as if he were hosting a holiday meal. To family, he said. No one lifted their glass. The silence was so complete that I could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking. James set his glass down. Fine, he said. Let's be direct. He looked at me first. Olivia and I have been going through a difficult period. Rachel's expression hardened. A difficult period, she repeated. James ignored her. Sometimes marriages change. Sometimes people grow apart. It happens. Matthew sat back in his chair, his jaw tight. You cheated on Mom, he said. The room went still. James exhaled slowly as if Matthew had embarrassed him. This is more complicated than that. No, Matthew said. It isn't. Claire looked down at her hands. James's face darkened. I have made mistakes, he said. But I am trying to handle this in the least destructive way possible. I almost laughed. Least destructive. He had put our home at risk. He had moved money through Claire's company. He had tried to erase my legal rights while building a new life with her. And now he wanted credit for being careful. He slid the stack of documents across the table toward me. This is the agreement we discussed, he said. If Olivia signs it, we can all move forward without a drawn-out legal fight. Matthew looked at me. Mom, what is this? A separation agreement? I said. James leaned forward. It protects the company. It protects everyone. Does it? I asked. His eyes sharpened. Olivia. I opened the folder slowly. The first pages were familiar. The same language about temporary separation. The same attempt to give James control over the business. The same clauses designed to bury me under obligations I had not created. But this time, there were additional pages. My heart began to beat faster. I turned one page, then another. And there it was. A section titled Business Continuity and Family Guarantee. I read it once, then again. The document did not only shift financial responsibility onto me, it placed Matthew's name beside James's in a personal guarantee connected to company debt. My son was being positioned as responsible for loans he may not have understood. I looked up slowly. Matthew, I said, did Dad talk to you about guaranteeing company debt? His face changed. What? James sat forward quickly. That is not what this is. It's right here, I said. That is standard language. Matthew reached for the papers, but James grabbed the folder before he could. It is not something you need to worry about, James said sharply. Rachel's voice cut through the room. Then why is his name on it? James looked at her. Because he is part of the company. He is your son, Rachel said. Not your shield. The air seemed to leave the room. Claire flinched. Matthew stared at his father. Dad, he said quietly. What is she talking about? James's face tightened. I am trying to protect your future. No, I said. You are trying to protect yourself. He turned toward me, anger finally breaking through his polished expression. You have no idea what you are saying. I know you used our house as collateral. Matthew froze. I know you tried to sell this house. I continued looking around Hawthorne's dining room. And I know you were trying to make Matthew responsible for debts he did not create, Mom, Matthew whispered. James stood so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. This is exactly why we cannot have a reasonable conversation, he said. She has been poisoned by lawyers. She thinks everyone is against her. Rachel stood too. No, she said. She thinks you are hiding something. Claire's face had gone white. James looked at her, and for one brief moment I saw fear in his eyes, not anger. Fear. He knew the room was slipping away from him. He turned back to me. Sign the agreement, Olivia, he said, his voice low and controlled. We can end this respectfully. I looked at the pages in front of me. Then I looked at Matthew, at Rachel, at Claire, at James. For years he had expected me to lower my head, accept his version of reality, and thank him for whatever small piece of my own life he allowed me to keep. But not tonight. I closed the folder. I won't sign anything I said. James's face went completely still. And in that silence, I realized something important. He had not invited us to dinner to heal the family. He had invited us because he thought a room full of witnesses would make me easier to control. What he did not understand was that witnesses could see the truth too. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I did not sleep the night before, not because I was afraid of losing, because I understood exactly what was at stake. For 34 years, James had been the face of Smith Family Renovations. Employees trusted him. Clients respected him. Vendors returned his calls before anyone else's. To most people, he was the company. The next morning, that image was about to be tested. Karen picked me up shortly before 8. You ready? She asked as I got into her car. No. She smiled slightly. Good. People who think they're ready usually underestimate what's coming. The drive to the company headquarters felt surreal. I had walked through those doors thousands of times over the years. I had balanced payroll there, answered phones there, helped plan expansion projects there. But this morning felt different. This morning I wasn't arriving as James's wife. I was arriving as the successor trustee of the controlling interest in the company. And James had no idea how much evidence was already waiting inside. When we entered the boardroom, several members of the board were already seated. Some nodded politely when they saw me. Others looked confused. A few looked nervous. They knew something serious was happening. They just didn't know what. Thomas arrived carrying 2 large legal binders. Karen carried 3 more. Then, 10 minutes later, James walked in. He looked confident. Too confident. He stopped when he saw me sitting beside Thomas and Karen. For the briefest moment, his smile faltered. Then it returned. What is this? He asked. Thomas calmly adjusted his glasses. A board meeting. James laughed. No. What is this? His eyes moved from Karen to Thomas, then to the stacks of documents, then back to me. The room grew quiet. I said nothing. James sat down slowly. Matthew entered a few moments later. He looked exhausted. Rachel followed behind him. Neither spoke. At exactly 9 o'clock, the board chairman called the meeting to order. The first 15 minutes were routine. Quarterly reports, revenue updates, pending contracts, normal business. Then, Thomas Reed stood. Before we continue, he said there is a matter regarding ownership and governance that must be addressed. Every eye in the room turned toward him. James folded his arms. This should be interesting. Thomas opened one of the binders. Following the death of Helen Smith, amendments to the Smith Family Trust became effective. James went still. Not visibly. But I knew him. I saw it. The slight tightening around his eyes, the small shift in his shoulders, the instant calculation. Thomas continued. These amendments transferred Hawthorne House and 51% of the voting shares of Smith Family Renovations into the trust. Silence. Then one board member frowned. 51%, Thomas nodded. Yes. The room erupted into whispers. James stood immediately. That is not correct. Thomas remained calm. It is correct. No, James snapped. Those documents were never finalized. Thomas opened another binder. Yes, they were. He placed a notarized document in front of the chairman, then another, and another. The chairman reviewed them carefully. The room grew quieter with each passing second. James looked at me. For the first time, there was no confidence left in his eyes. Only anger. You knew about this. Yes. When long enough? His jaw tightened. You went behind my back. The irony almost made me laugh. For decades, I had been the last person informed about decisions affecting my own life. Now suddenly secrecy offended him. Thomas continued. Per the terms of the trust, Olivia Smith became successor trustee upon Helen Smith's death. One board member looked directly at me. which means Thomas answered before I could. It means Mrs. Smith currently controls the trust's voting authority. The room went completely silent. James looked like someone had punched him. You're serious? Yes. No. His voice rose. This is ridiculous. He pointed directly at me. She doesn't know how to run this company. A few years earlier, that sentence would have devastated me. Now it only revealed how desperate he was becoming. Karen stood. Mrs. Smith managed the financial operations of this company for years. James ignored her. She hasn't been involved in major decisions in a decade. Because you removed her? Karen replied. The room grew even quieter. The chairman looked uncomfortable. Several board members suddenly seemed very interested in their notes. Nobody wanted to be in the middle of what was happening. Unfortunately for them, they already were. Then Karen opened a file. And there is another matter. James immediately looked toward her. Whatever confidence he had left vanished. Karen placed several documents on the table. These records show substantial transfers from company accounts to Bennett Events, LLC. Nobody spoke. Karen continued. The transfers total approximately $470,000 over an 18-month period. Several board members exchanged looks. One of them frowned. What services were provided? Nobody answered. Karen slid another document forward. We have requested supporting documentation. Another silence. Then someone asked the question everyone was thinking. Were these legitimate business expenses? James finally spoke. Yes. Karen looked at him. Can you provide documentation? Of course, when James hesitated. Only for a second. But everyone saw it. Those records are being organized. Karen nodded slowly. Interesting. The board members shifted uncomfortably. They could smell trouble now. And trouble spreads quickly in rooms filled with liability. Then Matthew spoke. His voice was quiet. Dad. James turned toward him immediately. Matthew, not now. No. The word landed hard. Dad, I need to know something. The room became silent again. What Matthew swallowed. Why is my authorization attached to some of those transfers? My heart stopped. The question hung in the air. James looked genuinely surprised. Not because the question existed, because Matthew had asked it publicly. That's a misunderstanding. Is it? James stepped toward him. Matthew, we'll discuss this later. No. My son stood. His hands were shaking. I've spent 3 days reviewing documents. James froze. I found my name attached to approvals I don't remember making. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Matthew looked directly at his father. Did you use my credentials? James said nothing. Dad. Still nothing. The silence answered more loudly than words ever could. Rachel lowered her eyes. I felt tears sting mine. Not because Matthew was finally seeing the truth, because of the look on his face, the heartbreak, the confusion, the realization that the man he admired most might not be the man he thought he was. James tried again. You don't understand how these systems work. Then explain it, not here. Why not? The room held its breath. James looked around. For the first time in years, he no longer controlled the conversation. He no longer controlled the room. And he knew it. Then he did what desperate people often do. He attacked. This is a setup. The words exploded across the boardroom. This entire thing is a setup. He pointed at me. She planned this. Then at Karen. She found lawyers willing to help her. Then at Thomas. She manipulated my mother's documents. Several people gasped. Thomas remained perfectly calm. Be careful, James. No. James stepped forward. These documents are fake. Karen smiled slightly. Fake, yes. Thomas opened the final binder, the original trust amendment, the notarized version, the witnesses, the filings, the signatures, every piece of evidence, every protection Helen had carefully prepared. He laid them on the table one by one, like a prosecutor presenting a case. James stared. The room stared with him. The chairman reviewed the documents. Then he slowly looked up. Everything appears valid. James looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. No. The chairman nodded. Yes. Silence. Then another board member spoke. Given the ownership questions and financial concerns, I move that James Smith be temporarily suspended from financial authority pending investigation. Another voice immediately agreed. Then another. Then another. The vote happened quickly. Too quickly for James to stop it. When it ended, he stood frozen beside his chair. For the first time since I had met him, he looked small. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man watching the future he built around lies begin to collapse. Then his eyes found mine. The hatred there shocked me. Not sadness, not regret. Hatred. You did this. I met his gaze calmly. No, James. My voice barely rose above a whisper. You did. And for the first time since I opened Helen's letter, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, because he finally understood something. This was only the beginning. By the time the board meeting ended, the news had already begun spreading. Smith Family Renovations wasn't a small company anymore. It employed dozens of people, worked with major contractors across Ohio, and had spent years building a reputation that James carefully protected. Now that reputation was cracking, and James knew it. Within 24 hours, relatives started calling. Not to ask what had happened, to ask what was wrong with me. My cousin Linda called first. "Olivia, honey, are you okay? I'm managing." There was an awkward pause. Then she lowered her voice. "James says you're trying to take everything." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. He says you've become obsessed with revenge. Another call came from James's brother, then a family friend, then an aunt I hadn't spoken to in months. The story was always the same. Olivia was angry. Olivia was emotional. Olivia was trying to destroy the company. Olivia couldn't accept that her marriage was over. Not one person mentioned the affair. Not one person mentioned the hidden debts. Not one person mentioned the attempt to sell Hawthorne House. James had carefully edited the story, and, unfortunately, many people preferred the simple version. The crazy wife, the successful husband, the ugly divorce. It was easier than facing the truth. Fortunately, I was no longer trying to win a popularity contest. I was trying to uncover facts. And facts were finally beginning to arrive. 3 days after the board meeting, Karen called me. "We have movement." I immediately sat upright. What kind Claire Bennett wants to talk? For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Claire. Yes. What changed? Karen exhaled slowly. I think James got careless. 2 hours later, Claire walked into Karen's office. She looked completely different from the woman who hosted the party at Hawthorne House. The confidence was gone. The polished certainty was gone. Even her posture seemed smaller, like someone carrying a weight she could no longer ignore. Karen closed the conference room door behind her. Claire sat across from us and immediately placed a thick envelope on the table. "I should have listened to you." I said nothing. She opened the envelope. Inside were copies of invoices, contracts, emails, bank statements, text messages, and printed screenshots. More documents than I expected. Far more. Claire swallowed hard. "James called me after the board meeting. I waited. He was furious. What did he say?" Her laugh was bitter. "He said everything was my fault." The room went silent. "He blamed you," I asked. Claire nodded. "He said the payments through Bennett Events attracted attention. He said I wasn't careful enough." I looked down at the documents. $470,000. Vacation expenses, luxury hotels, private dinners, vehicle payments, all hidden behind Claire's company. "Did he tell you what the money was actually for?" Claire shook her head. "No, not until recently." Karen leaned forward. "What changed?" Claire looked directly at me. "He asked me to sign another document." My stomach tightened. "The loan papers?" "Yes." She reached into the envelope and removed a copy. This time I read it. Karen reviewed the pages quickly, then her expression darkened. "Oh my God, what I asked." Karen turned the document toward me. The paperwork was complicated, but the conclusion wasn't. James had been preparing to shift financial responsibility toward Bennett Events, toward Claire, toward her company, toward her assets, toward her future. If everything collapsed, Claire could end up carrying much of the blame. She stared at the table. I asked him why my company was guaranteeing obligations it didn't create. What did he say? He told me not to worry about it. The room became quiet. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was familiar. "Don't worry about it. Trust me. You don't understand. That's how James operated. He relied on people believing him faster than they questioned him." Claire looked up. "He never planned to build a future with me, did he?" The question wasn't really for me. It was for herself. Still, I answered. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "Neither do I anymore." Then she pushed another folder across the table. "There's more." Inside were printed text messages, hundreds of them. Some were ordinary, others weren't. One message stopped me cold. "James. If anyone asks, the events were legitimate business development expenses. Another, James, keep using the company account. I'll handle the bookkeeping. Another, James, nobody checks this stuff." Karen looked at me. "That's helpful." Helpful. The understatement almost made me laugh. The messages continued. Travel arrangements, expense discussions, conversations about invoices, requests to change descriptions, instructions regarding payments. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. Very close. Then Claire handed over something even more valuable, a small flash drive. "What's on this?" Karen asked. Claire hesitated. "Recordings." The room froze. "Recordings?" She nodded. I started recording some conversations after the first loan paperwork. Why? Because something felt wrong. I remembered our meeting at the cafe, the fear in her eyes, the first crack in her certainty. She had been suspicious even then. Karen inserted the drive into her laptop. A voice filled the room. James's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. For a moment, nobody moved. Then we listened. The recording wasn't dramatic. No movie-style confession. No screaming, no threats. Something much better. The truth. James casually discussing money. James discussing transfers. James discussing keeping things quiet. James discussing protecting himself. Over and over again. Protecting himself. Not Claire, not Matthew, not the company, not me. Himself. Karen removed the flash drive slowly. Well, nobody spoke. Finally, she looked at Claire. This is significant. Claire laughed bitterly. That's one way to describe it. Then her expression changed. Fear returned. He knows I have some of this. My stomach tightened. What do you mean he called yesterday? The room became still. What did he say? Claire looked at me. He said if I wasn't careful, people might think I was responsible. Karen's eyes narrowed. A threat. Not directly, but close. Claire nodded. Very close. For the first time, I genuinely felt sorry for her. Not because she had been innocent. She wasn't. She knew James was married. She participated in choices that hurt other people. But now she was experiencing something I understood too well. James only protected people as long as they were useful. The moment they became a liability, they became expendable. Just like I had. Just like Matthew. And now, just like Claire. A week later, another break came unexpectedly. Several guests from Claire's party agreed to provide statements, not because they cared about me, not because they suddenly became heroes, because they cared about their own liability. Many of them had attended the event believing Hawthorne House belonged to James. Some had discussed business opportunities based on that assumption. Others had received promotional materials describing the estate as part of James's personal portfolio. Every statement helped. Every statement built the picture. Every statement transformed that awful night into evidence. The same party James used to humiliate me was now becoming one of the strongest pieces of proof against him. Karen smiled when she reviewed the witness statements. He practically documented his own misconduct. He was proud of it. Yes, she closed the file. That's usually when people make mistakes. A few days later, James requested a private meeting, not through attorneys, not through the board, directly. The message was short. We need to talk. Alone. I showed it to Karen. What do you think I asked? She considered it. I think he's losing control. Should I meet him? Karen thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Why? Because desperate people reveal things. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening. As I prepared to leave, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. Months ago, I would have been terrified. Months ago, James could still make me doubt myself. Now, something was different. Not because I had become fearless, because I finally understood who he was. And once you truly understand someone, they lose much of their power over you. As I grabbed my coat, my phone buzzed. A message from Karen. One sentence. Be careful. He's running out of options. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I slipped the phone into my purse. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, James Smith was no longer the most dangerous person in the room. He was simply the man everyone was beginning to see clearly. And that terrified him more than anything else. I met James at a private restaurant overlooking the river. Years earlier, it had been one of our favorite places, back when anniversaries still meant something, back when he reached for my hand across the table instead of calculating how much control he still had over me. The hostess led me to a quiet corner booth. James was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a brief second, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, because he looked tired. The confident executive who had charmed investors, employees, and family members for years seemed diminished somehow. His suit was still expensive. His watch was still polished, but the certainty was gone. I sat down across from him. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, James folded his hands. You look well. I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, that was how he chose to begin. You didn't ask me here to discuss my appearance. No, then let's not waste time. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Even now he preferred control. Even now he wanted the conversation on his terms. Unfortunately for him, those days were over. The waiter appeared. Neither of us ordered food. After he left, James leaned forward. This has gone too far. I stared at him. Has it? Yes. Interesting. His jaw tightened. Olivia, the company is suffering. The company? Yes. Or you? For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked away. That told me everything. The company wasn't his concern. He was. Always had been. You know what I mean? He said finally. No, I really don't. His expression darkened. Employees are worried. So am I. Clients are nervous. They should be. The silence that followed felt heavy. Finally, James sighed. Why are you doing this? The question stunned me, not because he asked it, because he sounded sincere, as though he genuinely didn't understand. You cheated on me. His eyes closed briefly. That's not what I mean. You lied to me. Olivia, you hid money. Listen, you put our home at risk. Stop. No. For the first time in years, I didn't lower my voice. I didn't soften my words to protect his feelings. I simply told the truth. You brought me to your mistress's party and humiliated me in front of strangers. James looked away. You tried to make me sign documents that would have left me responsible for your debts. His shoulders stiffened. You tried to use Matthew. His face hardened. And there it was. The only accusation that truly bothered him. Not the affair, not the lies. Not me. Matthew. Because deep down he knew it was true. I was protecting him. No. I shook my head. You were protecting yourself. The waiter returned. Neither of us ordered. He left again. James rubbed his temples. For several moments, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Then he surprised me. I'm sorry. The words hung between us. Simple. Quiet. Unexpected. A younger version of me might have cried, might have reached across the table, might have mistaken those words for healing. But I had spent too many years listening to James, and I had finally learned something important. Words matter, but timing matters too. Are you? I asked. His eyes lifted. Yes. For what? He frowned. What do you mean? Which part are you sorry for? Silence. I waited. Eventually he spoke. The affair. Anything else? Another silence. Longer this time. Then I handled things badly. Not I lied, not I stole, not I manipulated people, not I betrayed our son. Handled things badly. The language of a man still protecting himself. I nodded slowly. Thank you. Relief appeared briefly on his face, then I continued. But that isn't remorse. The relief vanished. What it's strategy? His eyes narrowed. You think everything is manipulation now? No, I leaned forward. I think this is. The truth settled between us. James looked away first. That told me all I needed to know. After a long pause, he reached into his briefcase. My stomach tightened. More documents. Of course, even now, even here. He slid a folder across the table. What's this, a settlement proposal? I didn't touch it. Through attorneys, no. Then why are you showing me? Because I want to avoid unnecessary damage. Again, the same language, different packaging. I opened the folder. The offer was substantial. More substantial than I expected. The house, certain investments, cash assets. It looked generous. Until I reached the final pages. Then I saw it. Protection clauses. Liability limitations. Release language. Financial shielding. Not for me. For him. Of course. Always for him. I closed the folder. No. His face darkened. You didn't even finish reading it. Yes, I did. You read it for 3 minutes. I've spent decades reading documents. The truth was simple. James wasn't offering fairness. He was offering damage control. And we both knew it. Olivia. His voice softened. Dangerously. Familiar. The voice he used when he wanted something. Please. The word surprised me. James rarely said please, not sincerely, not anymore. I looked at him carefully. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. Not fear of losing me, fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of accountability, everything he had spent years avoiding. I don't want this to become ugly. I almost laughed. Become ugly? As though ugly had not arrived months ago, maybe years ago. James, I spoke gently, calmly, the way one might speak to someone refusing to see reality. It already is. He looked down. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he asked the question that mattered. What happens now? I thought about that. About Matthew, about Rachel, about Sophie, about employees who had done nothing wrong, about families who depended on Smith family renovations, about Karen, Thomas, Helen, everyone caught in the blast radius of James's choices. Then I answered. The truth happens. His shoulders sagged. Not dramatically. Just enough. As though some part of him finally understood there would be no easy escape. No magical conversation, no last-minute charm, no signature, no shortcut. The truth was coming. And this time, nobody was going to carry it for him. A week later, the pressure intensified. Banks were reviewing records, auditors were reviewing transfers, the board was reviewing authorizations. James's legal team began requesting meetings, not because they felt confident, because they didn't. More evidence continued appearing. Claire's documents, the recordings, the witness statements, financial records, email chains. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to ignore. Eventually, James's attorneys requested formal settlement negotiations. Karen smiled when she received the request. They're worried. Good. She nodded. Very worried. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not victory. Relief. Because this was never about destroying James. Despite everything, I didn't want that. I didn't want the company destroyed. I didn't want employees unemployed. I didn't want Matthew carrying shame that belonged to his father. I simply wanted the truth. And I wanted the future protected from the damage James had created. During negotiations, Karen fought for exactly that. The family home would be protected. Matthew would be shielded from liability. The company's employees would remain secure. The trust assets would remain intact. James would face consequences. But innocent people wouldn't. When I told Karen that was what mattered most, she smiled. You know, she said most people in your position would be focused on revenge. I thought about that. Then I shook my head. Revenge is expensive. How so? It costs too much peace. Karen smiled. That's probably why you're winning. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was simply tired. Tired of anger. Tired of fear. Tired of letting James define the story. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to his choices. I was making my own. And that made all the difference. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown. No shouting. No last-minute confessions. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, it ended through documents, negotiations, signatures, and consequences. The kind of ending that arrives quietly after a very long storm. By then, James had already lost control of Smith family renovations. The board had permanently removed him from financial authority. Several investigations had confirmed what Karen and Thomas suspected from the beginning. Company funds had been misused, records had been manipulated, debt had been concealed, and while some issues were resolved through settlements rather than criminal proceedings, James's reputation never recovered. For a man who had spent years building his identity around success, that loss seemed to hurt him more than anything else. He moved into a small apartment outside Columbus. Not the luxury condominium he had planned, not the glamorous future he had promised Claire. Just a modest apartment with beige walls and a parking lot view. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, James had treated ordinary life as though it were beneath him. In the end, ordinary life was all he had left. I heard most of this through attorneys and business updates. I wasn't interested in monitoring his downfall. The truth was that I had spent too many years thinking about James already. I wanted to spend whatever years remained thinking about something else. Myself, my family, my future. And surprisingly, that future began with Claire. A month after the settlement, she called. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Hello, Olivia. Her voice sounded different. Lighter somehow. Not happier. Just more honest. Yes. There was a brief pause. I wanted to tell you something personally. I waited. I left. I knew immediately what she meant. James. Yes. The word carried exhaustion. Not heartbreak. Exhaustion. The kind that comes after finally accepting something you've been avoiding. What happened? Claire laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes people laugh when the truth finally becomes impossible to deny. Nothing happened, she said. And that was the problem. I listened quietly. He blamed everyone. The sentence didn't surprise me. His attorneys, his partners, his employees, me. Another pause, but never himself. I closed my eyes. That sounded familiar. He still talks about what everyone did to him. Claire's voice softened. I realized something, Olivia. What he tells every story like he's the victim. The truth landed gently. Because it was true. For years, I had watched James rewrite reality. Every disagreement became an attack on him. Every consequence became unfair. Every criticism became betrayal. Every mistake belonged to someone else. Claire continued. I don't think he ever really loved me. I thought carefully before answering. I don't know if that's true. She was quiet. But I think he loved being admired. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she sighed. I'm sorry. The words were simple. Real. Nothing like James's apology. I know. I'm serious, I know. There wasn't much else to say. Some apologies arrive too late to repair damage, but they can still matter. When we ended the call, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not forgiveness. Closure. A door quietly closing. A chapter ending. The next important conversation happened 2 weeks later. Matthew came to see me. Alone. I was working in the garden when his truck pulled into the driveway. The roses were beginning to bloom again. The same roses James once wanted removed because they required too much maintenance. I smiled at the memory. Funny how often beautiful things require patience. Matthew walked slowly toward me. He looked nervous. For a moment, he reminded me of the little boy who used to confess after breaking something. Mom, I set down my gardening gloves. Hi, sweetheart. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his eyes filled with tears. I should have listened to you. My heart broke instantly. Not because he was apologizing, because of how much pain he was carrying. I opened my arms. He stepped forward immediately, and just like that, my 36-year-old son became a little boy again. We stood in the garden holding each other while both of us cried. When we finally sat down on the porch, he wiped his face and stared out at the yard. I wanted to believe him. I know. He's my father. I know. I kept thinking there had to be an explanation. I nodded, because I understood. Love makes people hopeful. Especially when the alternative is painful. Matthew swallowed hard. When I found out about the documents, his voice cracked. The signatures, the debt, the lies. He looked down. I felt stupid. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You were trusting. That's not better. Yes, it is. He looked at me. Why? Because trusting people isn't a flaw. My voice softened. Taking advantage of trust is. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Matthew smiled sadly. You always know what to say? I laughed. No, I've just had more time to make mistakes. That earned a real smile, the first one I'd seen from him in months. Later that evening, Rachel and Sophie joined us for dinner. The house felt different now. Lighter. Not because everything had been repaired, because honesty was finally allowed inside. Halfway through dinner, Sophie climbed into my lap. She was 8 years old now, old enough to sense when adults were sad, young enough to believe hugs could still fix things. Maybe she was right. Grandma, yes, sweetheart. Are you happy? The question surprised everyone. Rachel looked embarrassed. Matthew looked amused. But Sophie waited seriously for my answer. I thought about it. About the last year. About Helen's letter. About James. About everything I'd lost. And everything I'd found. Then I smiled. Yes. The answer felt true. Not because life was perfect. It wasn't. Not because the pain had disappeared. It hadn't. But because I was no longer living someone else's version of my life. And that mattered. Later that night, after everyone went home, I drove to Hawthorne House, alone. The property was quiet beneath the evening sky. I walked through the front door carrying only my keys. No lawyers, no documents, no conflict, just me. The house felt different now. Not haunted by betrayal, not poisoned by humiliation, just waiting for me to decide what came next. I walked into the dining room where James had tried to pressure me into signing away my future. Then into the foyer where Claire's party guests once admired a life built on lies. Then upstairs, to Helen's writing room. The same room where everything changed. I sat at her desk and looked around. The books, the lamp, the chair, the quiet. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided. What should Hawthorne House become? Keeping it exactly as it was felt wrong. Selling it felt wrong too. Neither option felt like healing. Then an idea came. Simple, unexpected, right. I smiled. Not because I had all the answers, because for the first time the future felt like something I was creating rather than surviving. And that night, sitting in Helen's old chair, I finally understood something important. Hawthorne House didn't need to remain a monument to betrayal. It could become a monument to recovery. And I knew exactly where to begin. 9 months after the divorce was finalized, Hawthorne House looked alive again. Not the way it had during Claire's party. Not with expensive decorations, artificial smiles, and people pretending to be something they were not. This was different. Real. The gardens had been restored. The front porch had been repaired. The old library had been cleaned and reorganized. Fresh flowers sat in windowsills where dust had gathered for years. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like Helen again. When I first told Karen, Thomas, Matthew, and Rachel what I wanted to do with the property, they were surprised. You're not selling it? Karen asked. No. You're keeping it? Yes. For yourself. I smiled. Not exactly. What I envisioned was something Helen would have loved. A place where women starting small businesses could gather and learn from one another. A place where local community organizations could host events. A place where family celebrations could happen without needing luxury or status. A place where people could feel welcome. Not impressed. Welcome. The transformation took months. The old ballroom became an event space. Several unused offices became meeting rooms. The library became a resource center for local entrepreneurs. The dining room remained exactly as Helen left it. Some memories deserved protection. Others deserved reinvention. Every week brought something new. Workshops, community dinners, charity events, small business networking groups, book clubs, local fundraisers. The house slowly filled with laughter again. Real laughter. Not the forced kind I remembered from James's party. One afternoon, I stood near the front entrance watching a group of women set up for a small business conference. A young woman carrying a box smiled at me. "Mrs. Smith, yes. Thank you for doing this." I looked around. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the house. "This place?" I wasn't sure how to answer. The truth was that I hadn't created it alone. Helen had started it. Karen had protected it. Thomas had defended it. Matthew and Rachel had helped rebuild it. Even the painful lessons from James had played a role. But the woman waited for an answer. So I smiled. "You're welcome." After she walked away, I realized something. For the first time in years, people knew my name without attaching it to James. Not James Smith's wife, not James Smith's problem, not James Smith's responsibility. Just Olivia. It felt surprisingly wonderful. Meanwhile, Smith family renovations slowly stabilized. The board implemented stronger oversight. Financial reporting became more transparent. Several managers stepped into leadership roles. Matthew grew into his position with a confidence I hadn't seen before. Not because his father was guiding him, because he was finally learning to trust himself. One evening, he stopped by Hawthorne House after work. I found him standing in the library. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then laughed. "Actually, yes. That sounds surprising." "It is." He looked around the room. "I spent so many years trying to become Dad." The honesty caught me off guard. Matthew continued. "I thought success looked like him." My heart ached. "Now," he smiled, "now I think success looks more like you." I immediately felt tears forming. "That's not fair." "Why?" "Because you're trying to make your mother cry." He laughed. The sound filled the room. And suddenly I realized how long it had been since laughter felt effortless. A few weeks later, Rachel organized a small family dinner at Hawthorne House. Nothing elaborate, just family. The people who remained. The people who chose honesty over appearances. The people who stayed. That evening, the dining room glowed with soft candlelight. Rachel brought homemade lasagna. Matthew carried desserts. Sophie arrived carrying a handmade drawing she insisted deserved a place on the wall. According to her, it was important art. The drawing featured me standing beside Hawthorne House wearing a superhero cape. Naturally. I framed it. Sophie considered that the correct decision. Halfway through dinner, everyone drifted into easy conversation. The kind families have when nobody is pretending. The kind I thought I had lost forever. At one point, Rachel looked around the table and smiled. "You know what?" "What?" Matthew asked. "This feels peaceful." We all paused, because she was right. Not exciting. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Peaceful. And after everything that had happened, peaceful felt like a miracle. Later that evening, after everyone left, I climbed the stairs to Helen's writing room. I still visited occasionally, not because I was trapped in the past, because that room reminded me where everything changed. I opened the desk drawer. Inside was the original letter, the one that had started it all. The paper was slightly worn now from being read so many times. I unfolded it carefully. "My dear Olivia, if you are reading this, then I am gone and James has finally shown you the part of himself he worked so hard to hide." I smiled sadly, then continued reading. As I reached the final page, my eyes settled once again on Helen's last sentence. "Hawthorne House is not James's to sell, borrow against, or give away, and neither are you." For a long time, I simply sat there, thinking, reflecting, remembering. When I first read those words, I thought Helen was talking about property, about legal rights, about protecting assets. Now I understood something deeper. She wasn't only protecting a house, she was protecting me. The version of me that James spent years trying to convince was small. The version of me that slowly disappeared beneath compromised silence and self-doubt. The version of me that needed to remember her own worth. James believed money was power. Control was power. Status was power. He spent years chasing all three and lost nearly everything. Helen understood something he never did. Real power isn't forcing people to stay. It's knowing you'll be okay if they leave. I folded the letter carefully, then returned it to the drawer. Outside the window, the evening sky glowed softly above the gardens. The house was quiet, peaceful, home. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt grateful. Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, not for the lies, but for what came after. Because losing the marriage I thought I had forced me to find the woman I had forgotten, the woman who survived, the woman who fought back, the woman who rebuilt, the woman who finally remembered she was enough, all by herself. Life lesson and final reflection. If there is one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it is this: never confuse silence with weakness. For years, I believed keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting my family. I thought that if I stayed patient, stayed loyal, and stayed quiet, things would eventually get better. Sometimes they do. But sometimes silence becomes a place where manipulation grows. Sometimes the people who love you most are the people who need you to ask hard questions. And sometimes the people who fear your voice the most are the people who benefit from your silence. I also learned something equally important about financial independence. You do not need to be wealthy to protect yourself. You do not need to be an expert. You simply need to understand what belongs to you, what you are signing, and what questions you have the right to ask. Never let anyone make you feel guilty for wanting to understand your own finances, your own future, or your own legal rights. Trust is important, but trust should never replace transparency. Most of all, I learned that losing one chapter of your life does not mean losing your future. There were moments when I truly believed everything was over. My marriage, my home, my family, my sense of self. But sometimes life removes what is false so something stronger can finally grow. Healing did not come from revenge. It came from truth. It came from boundaries. It came from remembering my own value. And if you're watching this today while going through your own difficult chapter, I hope you remember something Helen taught me. You are not something that belongs to another person. You are not something that can be signed away, controlled, or diminished by someone else's choices. Your worth remains yours. Always. If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Olivia's position? Would you have confronted James immediately, or would you have stayed quiet and gathered evidence first? And please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love hearing from people around the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more emotional storytelling journeys. Thank you for spending this time with me.